I received a frustrating WhatsApp message from my sister. I left your disabled daughter at your home. Panic-stricken, I rushed home, only to find my daughter sobbing uncontrollably, alone, outside the house. This was the breaking point. I couldn't rely on my sister to look after my kids anymore. It was time to show her what family truly meant. My name is Amanda. I'm 43 years old and have a passion for baking. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved experimenting in the kitchen. You'd think I'd be a master by now, right? And, well, not to brag, but I am. Mostly. Except for chiffon cakes. My kids love to tease me about those. Mom, your chiffon cake's so dry. Don't worry, we'll help you next time. But when it comes to muffins, I'm a star. My kids' friends often gush, we wish you were our mom. My own kids just give me smug looks, as if to say, yep, that's our mom. These little moments of banter and joy make family life so special, or so I thought. But my sister Kathy's idea of family was vastly different. This story begins a few years ago, during spring vacation, when my family visited my parents' home. We were casually watching TV when Kathy blurted out, lately, there are so many kids with developmental disabilities. I wonder why. Her comment was as out of place as it was jarring. The TV wasn't even discussing disabilities. Everyone, including my mom and husband, turned to her, puzzled. What's with the sudden comment? I asked. A colleague's child was recently diagnosed with a developmental disability, she replied. Apparently, kids who are restless or struggle academically might fall into that category. I don't know much about it, but honestly, I think Sarah might have one too. I was stunned. Sarah is Kathy's daughter, my niece. She'd always seemed like a perfectly normal child to me. Why would you think that? I asked, trying to stay calm. Well, compared to Ken, she's not as smart. Her language skills are underdeveloped. It's like she has a poor memory or something, Kathy insisted. Mom, my husband, and I exchanged uneasy glances. None of us were experts on developmental disabilities, but nothing about Sarah had ever struck us as unusual. Kathy, however, seemed fixated. You just don't get it, Amanda, she said, frustrated. I've been researching developmental disabilities. I know what I'm talking about. At the time, we brushed it off, assuming Kathy would consult a doctor if she was truly concerned, but by the time summer rolled around, her tone had shifted alarmingly. I knew it. Sarah does have a developmental disability, Kathy declared during another family gathering. Her voice carried an unsettling note of triumph, as though she'd just solved a mystery. Did you take her to a doctor? Mom asked, concerned. No, I didn't need to. I have proof, Kathy said smugly. Proof? Mom frowned. Stop talking like she's some kind of criminal. But Kathy pressed on. Sarah starts elementary school next year, and she still can't write the alphabet. She's in kindergarten. That's perfectly normal, I said. Even my daughter, who's already in school, struggles with some letters. Well, that's because your daughter takes after you, Kathy shot back, a smug smile on her face. Her husband Tim chimed in. Maybe your daughter has a developmental disability too. Like mother, like daughter. Anger flared in me, but I held it back. Kids develop at their own pace. There's no need to rush, I said firmly. But Kathy wouldn't hear it. Ken could write the alphabet ages ago, she insisted, comparing Sarah to her older brother, who'd always been exceptionally bright. Ken is 3 years older, I pointed out. It's unfair to compare them. Tim scoffed. Well, from a medical perspective, Sarah clearly has a developmental disability. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Medical perspective? Tim, you're not a doctor. It was clear Kathy and Tim had convinced themselves that Sarah was deficient simply because she wasn't meeting the impossibly high standards they'd set for Ken. It wasn't just frustrating, it was heartbreaking. I always say my siblings graduated from a national university, so I'm smart. Tim's words still echoed in my mind. As ridiculous as they were, he often boasted about his intelligence, using his siblings' accomplishments as if they were his own. For the record, Tim himself graduated from a private university, and not even by choice. He had failed the National University Entrance Exam after ignoring his teacher's advice not to take it. Now, he manages a supermarket, yet insists he's just as brilliant as his siblings. If you're thinking, what is he even talking about? You're not alone. I later learned that Tim was something of an outcast within his own family, which perhaps explained his need to constantly prove himself. But his behavior didn't just stop at self-aggrandizement, it extended into how he and Kathy treated their daughter, Sarah. One day, my husband Mike cautiously suggested, maybe a professional should evaluate Sarah. It could help clear things up. Oh, I've already consulted professionals, Kathy replied quickly. For a moment, silence fell, and a collective question mark seemed to hang in the air. What do you mean by professionals? Mike asked. Well, I've watched health programs on TV, Kathy said matter-of-factly. Their observations matched Sarah's symptoms exactly, so it must be accurate. We all sighed in exasperation. Tim chimed in, backing Kathy up. Yes, those specials are very informative. A colleague of mine saw one, took their child to the doctor, and the diagnosis matched perfectly. It's serious stuff. Mom finally had enough. TV is just TV. Stop using it as your source for medical advice. If you're truly worried, take Sarah to a real doctor. Stay out of our parenting, Kathy snapped, her voice sharp. You're all so ignorant. And with that, she stormed out, dragging Tim and Ken with her, but leaving Sarah behind without a word. Mom sighed deeply. If they're going to act so high and mighty, the least they could do is take proper care of Sarah. Sarah, meanwhile, was playing with my daughter, her usual bright smile plastered on her face, but as I watched her, I noticed something. Every so often, her smile faltered, replaced by a fleeting look of sadness. She must have realized her family had left without her. That brave smile broke my heart. Sarah shouldn't have to carry the burden of our adult failures. I was more certain than ever that she didn't have a developmental disability, but rather, she was the victim of neglect and favoritism. Later that day, Kathy and Tim returned home in high spirits, shopping bags in hand. Mom's face darkened. Do you often leave Sarah behind when you go out shopping? It's just leaving her at home. What's the problem? Kathy shrugged. The problem is, you don't leave Ken behind. Why treat Sarah differently? She doesn't listen, so we're teaching her discipline, Kathy argued. Discipline her if you must, but don't just abandon her without explanation. That's cruel, Mom countered. Tim jumped in defensively. We provide her with proper meals and a good education. Why do you keep criticizing us? That's the bare minimum for parenting, I said sharply. You act like it's some grand favor. This is a family matter. Stay out of it, Amanda, Tim snapped. Sarah is my family too, I shot back. She's my niece. If she's being mistreated, I won't stay silent. My words seemed to hit a nerve. Kathy and Tim avoided my gaze, but their silence spoke volumes. If you suspect Sarah has a developmental disability, leaving her alone is even more irresponsible, Mike added. That's why we're teaching her to stay home alone. Kathy slammed her hand on the table. The argument dragged on for hours, going nowhere. Eventually, Kathy and Tim left early the next morning, cutting their visit short. Their favoritism towards Ken was painfully obvious throughout their stay. At meals, if Ken's favorite shrimp was served, Kathy and Tim would give him extra portions, even taking from Sarah's plate. Sarah, clearly used to this treatment, never protested. Instead, she simply complied, a resigned look on her face. The same pattern repeated itself in other ways. Promises of new toys and games were made to Ken, while Sarah was ignored. All family conversations revolved around Ken's achievements, leaving Sarah to sit quietly on the sidelines. It was heartbreaking to witness. One day, Kathy showed up unannounced with Sarah. Can you take care of her just for today? She asked. Even Sarah seemed confused by the sudden request. She glanced at me and said softly, I could just play in the park instead. Without asking too many questions, we agreed to look after her. When Kathy returned later that evening, she seemed apologetic. Thanks for watching, Sarah, she said. Why the short notice? I asked. Oh, Ken had friends over. Their moms are all doctors and lawyers. You know, it'd be awkward to have Sarah around. I was stunned. You're ashamed of your own daughter? She doesn't fit in with those families. What can I do? Kathy said with a laugh, as if it were a joke. That's no excuse, I said firmly. Whether Sarah has a disability or not, she's your daughter. You should be her biggest supporter, not her biggest critic. Kathy's smile vanished. You've only raised one child. Don't lecture me. With that, she yanked Sarah by the arm and left. These patterns continued. Kathy and Tim would leave Sarah with us, often for long periods, while they took Ken on elaborate outings. They showed up late to pick her up, offered no apologies, and acted like nothing was wrong. Their actions only reinforced my determination to step in. Sarah deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt, and I was going to do everything in my power to ensure she got it. I told you to call before coming over, didn't I? And why didn't you stick to the agreed time? My tone was sharper than usual, even in front of Sarah. I couldn't help it, I was furious. Oh, don't be so picky, Kathy replied nonchalantly. We're here to pick her up. aren't we? That's a given, I snapped. But you can't just drop her off carelessly without proper planning. What's with you lately? Always so irritated, is it menopause? Kathy quipped with a smirk. Tim burst into loud laughter, finding her remark hilarious. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep calm. You two are unbelievable. I keep repeating myself, you need to rethink how you're raising your kids. We are thinking about it, Kathy shot back. That's why Ken is involved in so many activities. Unlike your daughter, who doesn't do anything. We respect our daughter's wishes, because she said she didn't want to participate in those things. Well, we're respecting Ken's wishes, too. Isn't that right, Ken? Kathy turned to him. Ken nodded weakly, his forced smile betraying his true feelings. See? Kathy said triumphantly. Even Ken agrees. I sighed deeply. I'm tired of repeating myself. Fine, just take Sarah and go. Kathy grabbed Sarah by the arm, practically dragging her toward the car. Tim didn't say a word as he started the engine, leaving us standing there, feeling defeated once again. The next day, I was out shopping when I received a text from Kathy. Hey Amanda, you love Sarah, right? Confused, I replied, of course I do. She's my niece. Why are you asking this? Her response left me stunned. Great. Perfect. Consider her your daughter now. I left her at your doorstep. I didn't see anyone home, so you should hurry back. She might be crying alone. I froze in the middle of the store, rereading her message in disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? I called her immediately, but her phone was off. Panic set in. I abandoned my cart and rushed home. When I arrived, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting on the ground in front of the door, crying uncontrollably. Her face was buried in her hands, her small body shaking with sobs. Sarah, I ran to her and pulled her into a hug. She clung to me tightly, tears soaking my shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart, I'm here. It was clear what had happened. Even without asking, Kathy had abandoned her. Calls to Kathy and Tim's phones went unanswered. They had deliberately cut off contact. Through her tears, Sarah whispered, Auntie, I didn't want to be left like that. I held her close, my anger toward Kathy and Tim boiling over. How could they be so cruel? Right then and there, I made a promise to Sarah, and to myself, I would protect her. She didn't deserve this. Within a week, my husband, mother-in-law, and I went to Kathy's house to confront them. We brought along legal paperwork to formalize Sarah's adoption. Our plan was clear, Sarah would become our daughter. To our surprise, Kathy and Tim agreed without much resistance. Less burden for us, Kathy said with a dismissive shrug as she signed the papers. Her lack of remorse infuriated me, but I held my tongue. Sarah's well-being was my only priority. 3 months later, Kathy showed up at our house unexpectedly. We want Sarah back, she said, as if the past few months had never happened. What are you talking about? I asked, incredulous. She's a genius, Kathy exclaimed. I just found out she won an art contest. Her painting was displayed at the bank. We didn't even know she liked to draw. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Of course you didn't know, because you never paid attention to her. That contest? I submitted her artwork myself. Her preschool has been encouraging you to nurture her talents for years, but you ignored them. Kathy's face flushed with embarrassment. Well, it doesn't matter now. Just give her back. I shook my head. It's not that simple. The adoption is finalized. Sarah is our daughter now, but if she wants to go back to you, I won't stop her. She'll choose me, Kathy said smugly. Watch. I called Sarah into the room. When she saw Kathy, she hesitated, then clung to me. Mama, she said softly, a name she'd started using to combine mom and auntie. Kathy reached for her, but Ken stepped in front of his mother protectively. Ken, what are you doing here? Don't you have lessons? Kathy demanded. Ken's voice trembled as he replied, I don't want to go to lessons anymore. I hate them. I hate everything you make me do. Kathy tried to scold him, but I stopped her. Don't you get it? Your children don't want what you're forcing on them. You've been so focused on appearances and achievements that you've completely ignored their happiness. Kathy stood there, speechless. Just go home, I said firmly. You've lost the right to call yourself their mother. In the years that followed, our family dynamic flourished. Sarah, Ken, and our daughter grew close, forming a bond stronger than I could have imagined. Ken moved in with my mother, and Sarah thrived in our home, pursuing her passion for art. Though the road was challenging, it was worth every step. Our two-family household was filled with love, laughter, and the joy of watching the kids grow into their unique talents. Kathy and Tim, meanwhile, drifted into isolation, burdened by the consequences of their selfishness. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were rich with the one thing that mattered most, family.